Hello and welcome to our Horror Book Club podcast. Last year we did Dracula. Now we're doing Frankenstein. Frankenstein. And I'm Joe, here with me is my co-host Stan.
Hello and greetings.
Today we're just going to, as the title says, discuss the letters, which, when it comes to the first three letters, in my opinion, from what I've read, they seem kind of just fluff. So I don't really think there's much to discuss there. They're basically exploring in the Arctic.
Yeah. Captain Walton just exploring the Arctic, saying what he's done so far to his sister.
Margaret Saville, who's back home, and he's just, in the fourth letter, he comes across, a guy who is nearly dead, who happens to be, I suspect, Victor Frankenstein. And I don't think it states it outright that it's him. And you've got, and then chapter 1 is the man found in the Arctic by Walton and his crew, telling his story. But we're not yet at chapter 1. We're just at the first four letters.
There's nothing really that happens here. It's just set up that does seem a little fluffy.
Yeah, although, that said, the fact that Victor is found in the Arctic does... I think it should be taken as a bit of a metaphor for where Victor's at in his life. He's at a very... I have not read on ahead, but if I was to write someone being found in the Arctic, I'd probably, as an author, suppose that I should write them as fairly dour and depressed, and that they've not had a good time. They're in the winter of their life. And I think that's the idea here with Victor. He's in the winter of his life. He's not in the full summer or the spring. Now is the winter of his discontent, I guess you'd say. And this goes back to Shakespeare, who kind of set these linguistic norms in English literature.
And since we're dealing with an older author from the
19th century,
we are dealing with someone who is a lot more willing and understands a lot of those metaphors.
And he uses those storytelling mechanisms to convey her story. That said, Victor mentions that he's in despair and whatnot in this chapter, which I think further highlights his state of mind. And let me just find the part where he basically says he's in deepest gloom, and then he's asked what the heck he was doing up there, and he says, to seek one who fled from me. And they're just trying to extract information from him, going, was he traveling in the same way? Yes. And they fancy they've probably seen the other boat, but they didn't, I think. And they're just utterly flabbergasted by Victor.
You don't find someone this far up north just out of
idling about. Yeah. And we get that we get the sense that Victor's basically a tormented individual. And it's the way he talks, he's full of self-pity. And it's I thank you for your sympathy, but it is useless. My fate is nearly fulfilled. I await but for one event, and then I shall repose in peace. Yeah, he does have some self-pity, and there's still a bit of the delusion from his earlier days, I think, about his person. Because he says, you may easily perceive, Captain Walton, that I have suffered great and unparalleled misfortunes. To an extent, he's so woos me. When, no offense, but a lot of what Victor is suffering right now was brought about by his own hand, from what I understand of the classic stories, so that it's just you're still going to cling to your self-pity, Victor. Like, and I get the feeling that he's probably not going to be full of understanding for his monster when he finds him. He's generally going to be like, it's your fault, generally. And he's going to cast blame at his Adam, so to speak.
It's been a while since I've read this novel, I admit.
Okay, I've never read this story before.
And if I recall correctly, there's a point where, yes, that's what he does.
When you out to perhaps
take an aspect
of responsibility, yeah, because like already I'm getting the sense of a hopelessly irresponsible man. Yes, he suffered immensely, but he just strikes me as just wanting to push the blame onto the monster. When, from what I understand in the classic story, the question is, who is the monster, Victor or his creation? Which the movies by Hammer and Universal kind of posit that Victor was kind of the monster. Although the difference is, in the movies, if you watch our horror cinema podcast, you'll see that there's a timeline, a way of watching those movies, where you can see that Victor learns responsibility and is even redeemed. But that's a unusual thing. And from what I remember hearing about, the original monster was not dumb and just some really, really dumb monster who needed someone like Dracula to guide him. He was actually really eloquent, very smart, and long-winded. Although the librarian did a great job with the character, where the Australian character and the librarian just end up signing him up for plastic surgery and for a dating app, and then suggest that he go into football as a career.
Well, that helped, and that's fairly consistent.
Although they probably should have signed him up as a literature professor instead.
Indeed, because sure, the monster might start out off bumbling and groaning, but as the story progresses,
he becomes smarter. There's only, I think, one of the Frankenstein movies that really approaches that, and I think that's the Frankenstein Created Woman film, where you actually have a Frankenstein creature that is sentient, intelligent, and whatnot. But that one goes freaking nuts. And yeah, like, not much has happened so far. They're just in the Arctic, finding an old coot and picking him up, and then the story starts. So, on that note, I guess we'll leave it there and ask that you smash that like and that subscribe button to stay tuned for our next video.